Hello everybody, welcome to another Mammoth Site video. Today we wanted to talk a little bit about what happens after the dig season. Now, our busy season is usually, May through August. Now, as we're getting into winter, we don't have anyone digging in our bone bed, so one of the questions people that visit ask is, so what do you guys do during the winter? And we figured a great thing to talk about would be our collections area. So I brought Kelly, our collections manager, here to talk a little bit about the importance of collections and what collections is. So Kelly, what exactly does a collections manager do?
So a collections manager has a couple different things that they have to focus on. One of which is the actual specimens themselves. So here I've got one of the bones that we have pulled out from our site and have put it into a long-term housing so that it's nice and safe within our collection space. But we're not only concerned about taking care of our bones, we also want to take care of our records too, such as field notes. For example, this field note notebook is from 1977. So preserving that so we can look back at our records is really useful. And we also want to make sure to keep track of our specimen records as well. So there's a lot of paperwork, looking at bones, making sure that everything is housed properly and taken care of.
So when you talked about record keeping and keep making sure everything's properly housed. So collections managers have to look at things long term, right? Mm-hmm. Why do we want to make sure that things are preserved long term? Other than beyond, we want to make sure that we keep the fossils intact. What's the goal of that?
Absolutely. So we want to keep our bones intact, not only so that future generations can save these specimens and see them in the future, but also we want them available for research. So one of the collections that we also have to manage, in addition to our fossils, are modern comparative collections. So with that, for example, here I have an atlas vertebra of an elephant. Comparing that to a mammoth, there are a lot of similarities to them. So by having specimens that we can compare to each other can help scientists while they do studies on different organisms.
Awesome. So we talked about how we have some of the bones that we've removed from the bone bed and some of our comparative collections. Is the bone bed itself considered part of our collection?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And that's one of the things that makes our site so unique, is we are actually an in situ collection, where we're trying to maintain as many of the bones as possible in place, but of course we do take material out so that we can have it downstairs here in our collection space.
Awesome. So I've noticed that with our collections area, a lot of visitors don't necessarily get to see what the collections area looks like. Why do we keep it kind of isolated and kind of away from the general public?
Definitely. So there are a couple different things to consider within a collection space, one of which is security. We don't want just anyone coming in and out, especially because we don't want bones to go missing or anything like that. But a bigger concern really is just finding the proper storage conditions for these bones. We don't want them to be really exposed to light or fluctuations in temperature, because that could deteriorate the bones really quickly, and then you won't have really any specimens to look at. So that's one reason. Also, by keeping them isolated, that prevents anything like pests, little bugs, any sort of critter from coming in and damaging the collections as well.
Awesome. So with all of the different challenges that a preparator faces, what's probably the biggest challenge in keeping a collection and making sure a collection is secure, stable and and accessible to researchers?
Oh man, I mean, there's so many different parts to that, but definitely keeping everything organized is probably the biggest thing. Our collection probably has in total close to 10,000 specimens. So managing all of that is quite a feat, because you need to know where the specimens are located, how they're housed, how stable they are, what information is associated with them, what research has been done with them, where they were collected from. All of that has to be kept together. So that's probably the biggest task within collections management, is just making sure that's all nice and organized.
And what's your favorite part about being a collections manager?
Oh man, there's so many things. One of which, I guess, is just being close to the bones, getting access to them, and helping make sure that they are preserved for future generations. So it's not just me having to look at and take care of these, but helping make sure that people in the future collections managers, future researchers, people who want to come and visit and look at our collections can see the same things that we see today.
To me, that's one of the really cool things about paleontology, is the fact that, we're not just basing it off of, okay, this is what we want to study right now. We have to kind of prepare for, okay, what are the questions that are going to be asked, 30, 40, even 100 years in the future.
Exactly.
So now we're in our collections compactors, and these are just essentially shelves that can move, so that way we can kind of basically reduce the amount of space but also then still get access easily to our specimens.
Absolutely, yes.
And then on each shelf, we have labels that show, okay, this is what's supposed to go in each spot, and then each individual specimen has its own housing, correct? Mm-hmm. How do you decide what kind of housing to put on a specimen?
Well, there are certainly different things to consider when looking at types of housing, one of which would be the size of the specimen. If you have something really, really small, a vial would work just fine to put it in, versus if you have a mammoth femur that's going to be really long and take up a lot of space, you'll have different considerations, like maybe wanting to make an archival jacket or a clamshell jacket where there are two parts to it. For more medium-sized specimens, we can make things like this, which is called a cavity mount. So this here is a cuboid, so a bone in the foot, and so here it is placed within foam, and then it's got a protective fabric in there called Tyvek. And so this helps make sure that the specimen's not going to move with any sort of shaking or anything. And then we can easily take the specimen out so that researchers can still access it. So cavity mounts are just one example of really good housing, but there are certainly different types that you can use depending on what you have for a specimen.
And when you're kind of selecting the materials you're going to make it out of, you don't want to make it out of just anything. You have to make sure it's not going to off-gas or things like that. And can you explain a little bit what off-gassing really means?
Sure. So, yeah, like you were saying with archival materials, there's certainly different considerations to have. With off-gassing in particular, certain components, like wood, for example, over time it may kind of deteriorate, and depending on what it was treated with, it may actually release certain gases, which can overall, over time, potentially be detrimental to your specimens. So we really try to avoid having those types of things within a collection space. Hence why our shelving is made out of metal, and it's coated too. And then we have foam to help protect specimens, especially when we're moving around within shelves or as padding for these shelves too.
And so when we talk about all these different materials, they kind of are often labeled archival. So meaning basically that whatever we're going to study about these fossils in the future, have been tested and proven to not cause any lasting damage and not cause any issues in terms of chemical analysis and things like that.
Yeah, they have shown to be pretty stable for our bones.
So with all of the different collections work we do with the record keeping and stuff like you said, we spend more time actually in collections, working on collections-based tasks than excavating, correct?
Oh, absolutely. The amount of time that you're actually in the field doing work translates to much more time in the prep lab and especially in collections.
So you're looking at, for every hour, you're looking somewhere between like 6 to 10 hours?
Oh, absolutely. At least, depending on the specimen.
So all in all, collections management is just as important as fossil excavation, preparation, and research.
Absolutely. Without collections management, paleontology would not be possible as we know it.
Well, I want to thank you, Kelly, for taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk to us a little bit about collections. And I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.